You ever make a choice and then maybe a day later you kind of stop and think, why? Why did I do that? We all like to think we're in the driver's seat, right? That we're steering the ship of our lives with pure, cold logic. But what if I told you that most of the time we're not the only ones at the helm? In this explainer, we're going to pull back the curtain on the invisible forces, the hidden scripts that are constantly guiding your decisions, often without you even having a clue.
Now, F. Scott Fitzgerald wasn't a psychologist, but man, this quote just nails the central puzzle of the human mind. He's talking about our knack for holding two completely conflicting beliefs at once. And you know what? When it comes to making decisions, we hold two profoundly opposite ideas about our own minds.
So, the first idea, it's the one we all want to believe in. It's the idea that we're logical, deliberate, rational beings. Our mind is this perfectly calibrated machine. And yeah, it's a comforting thought, but it's only half the story. The other half, the messy, irrational, and frankly, far more human side, that's where things get really, really interesting.
Okay, let's just dive right in and tackle this rationality myth head on. Are our brains really the cool, calculating machines we think they are? Well, one of the first big clues that something else was going on didn't come from some fancy lab. No, it came from a truly bizarre and tragic accident that happened to a railroad worker way back in 1848. This is Phineas Gage. By all accounts, he was a model employee, super reliable, conscientious, the kind of guy you'd want in charge. Then, one day, a workplace explosion sent a 3.5-foot iron rod, yes, straight through his head. It destroyed a huge part of his brain's frontal lobe. And miraculously, he survived. But the man who woke up was not the same Phineas Gage. Just look at this contrast. Gage's core abilities, his memory, his speech, his basic intelligence, they were all still there. But the man was gone. The reliable foreman had turned into this impulsive, profane guy who was completely unable to make a plan or stick to any decision. His case was the first real shocking evidence that our ability to be rational isn't just some abstract skill. It's physically hardwired into the emotional centers of our brains. So if our own biology is setting the stage, it's the world around us that's directing the play. It turns out that the way a choice is presented to us, the frame, so to speak, can completely change the decision we end up making, even when the underlying facts are exactly the same. So let's start with this idea called mental accounting. It's really simple. It's the fact that we all have these separate, unwritten ledgers in our heads for different kinds of money. You've got rent money, which is serious, and then you've got birthday money, which feels like free money you can just blow. A dollar isn't just a dollar. And as we're about to see, the mental account we pull from can dramatically change our behavior. All right, let's do a little thought experiment here. Picture this. You've decided to go see a play, and the ticket costs $10. You get to the theater, you're all set for a great night. Now consider two slightly different situations. In scenario A, you open your wallet and realize you've lost a $10 bill. Bummer. In scenario B, you realize you've lost the actual $10 ticket that you'd already paid for. Now, in both cases, you're out $10. The economic reality is identical. So the question is, do you still fork over another $10 to see the play? Really think about it. What would you do? The results from the study are just wild. When people lost the cash, a whopping 88% of them just shrugged and bought a ticket anyway. They mentally filed that loss under general bad luck. But when the ticket was lost, less than half, only 46% were willing to buy another one. So what's the difference? Because in their heads, the cost of that one play just doubled to $20. And it came out of their specific entertainment mental account. And suddenly, that felt way too expensive. It's the exact same $10 loss, but the mental frame leads to a totally different decision. Okay, that was just $10. Let's really raise the stakes. Imagine you're a public health official. There's a deadly disease outbreak, and the lives of 600 people are in your hands. You have to choose between two different programs to fight this thing. First, just look at the options on the left, which are framed as lives saved, as gains. Program A is the sure thing. 200 people are guaranteed to be saved. Program B is a gamble. Now, when faced with a sure gain, most of us play it safe. We choose A. We lock in the win. Now look to the right. The outcomes are mathematically identical, but they're framed as lives lost. Program C is a sure loss. 400 people will die. Faced with a certain loss, our thinking completely flips. Most people suddenly become risk takers and choose the gamble, Program D. That simple switch from a gain frame to a loss frame totally reverses our preferences. It's powerful stuff. So, We've seen how the framing of a choice can kind of trick our brains into feeling one way or another. But what happens when there isn't a frame? When we're just faced with a flood of information? Well, that's when our brain's built-in autopilot kicks in. It uses these things called mental shortcuts or heuristics to make sense of the world fast.
All right, let's try one. Quick, without looking it up, which of these two cities has a bigger population, San Diego or San Antonio? Just go with your gut. What does it tell you?
So if you're from the US, that's a pretty tricky question because you've probably heard of both. But here's the crazy part. When researchers asked German students the exact same question, they got it right, San Diego, way more often. How on earth could they know better? Well, it's because they knew less. See, most of them had heard of San Diego, but had never heard of San Antonio. So their brains used a really simple shortcut. Hey, if I recognize one but not the other, the one I recognize is probably bigger. And in this case, that shortcut worked like a charm. And this leads us to this fantastic paradox called the less is more effect. All that extra knowledge the Americans had actually just cluttered up their judgment. It made them overthink it and get it wrong more often. The Germans' partial ignorance, on the other hand, let their simple, effective mental shortcut shine. It's amazing, right? Sometimes less information really is more. So, we've looked at how context and mental shortcuts shape our choices from the outside, but maybe the biggest battle of all happens right inside our own heads. It's that constant war between two different people, the person you are right now and the person you hope you'll be in the future. And absolutely no experiment captures this struggle more perfectly than the famous Stanford marshmallow test. You probably know this one. A researcher puts a little kid in a room all by themselves with a single delicious marshmallow just sitting on the table. The deal is pretty simple. You can eat this one marshmallow right now if you want. But if you can just wait for 15 agonizing minutes until the researcher comes back, you'll get a second marshmallow. It's a pure, raw test of delaying gratification. But the truly astonishing part came years, even decades later. When the researchers followed up with these kids, they found that the ability to wait for that second marshmallow was an incredibly powerful predictor of future success. The kids who held out ended up with higher test scores, they had better social skills, and they were way more resilient when it came to stress. It tells us that willpower isn't just something you have or you don't. It's a muscle that you can actually train. Okay, so if our willpower can fail us in the moment, how do we win this battle against our impulsive, present-tense selves? Well, the answer comes not from modern psychology, but from an ancient Greek epic. It's called a Ulysses Pact, or a pre-commitment strategy. The story goes like this. The hero Odysseus, also called Ulysses, had to sail his ship past the island of the Sirens. Their song was so beautiful, so irresistible, that it lured sailors to crash on the rocks and die. So Odysseus, knowing his future self would be powerless, made a plan. He had his crew plug their ears with wax, and then he had them tie him tightly to the ship's mast, with strict orders not to untie him no matter how much he begged or screamed. He used his rational mind to put constraints on his future irrational self. And we can do the same thing by setting up systems like automatic savings transfers or blocking distracting websites that protect us from our own worst impulses. So, where does all this leave us? We've seen how our own biology, the way choices are framed, our brain's little shortcuts, and our own internal battles, they all shape our decisions in ways we rarely even notice. You know, the best way to think about all these hidden forces is to see them as cognitive illusions. They're like an optical illusion. Even when you know the trick, you still see it. Your brain can't help it. We can't just wish our biases away. But just knowing they exist, understanding the patterns, the traps, that is the essential first step. It allows us to pause, to question our gut reaction, and to wonder if a different frame might lead to a much wiser choice. In the end, we may not be the purely rational beings we like to imagine ourselves to be, but that doesn't mean we're just helpless puppets. By understanding the forces that shape us, we can become better architects of our own choices. We can learn to spot the frame, to question the shortcut, and to make a plan for our future selves. So the question isn't just why we make the choices we do. It's now that you know about the hidden script, how will you choose to act?